quite often full of artworks that have never been on display for a variety of reasons, and especially the queer artworks, especially not if they are by major artists, but sometimes second-hand, third-hand artists that you can find in the collection. This is a wonderful material to work with, exactly from this kind of popular culture point of view that I mentioned a couple of minutes before. This is the iconography of Saint Sebastian. So, for example, the National Museum in Warsaw is very famous for a great collection of Baroque art and late Baroque art, and they have many images of Saint Sebastian. So I put on a display in the room devoted to Saint Sebastian all the major Baroque paintings representing the martyr saint, and I asked contemporary Polish artists, one of the main contemporary gay Polish artists, Karol Radziszewski, I'm sorry, to do a contemporary movie on Saint Sebastian, and this is a juxtaposition of a Baroque painting and a film shot from his movie. So these are some of the Baroque paintings. And of course, we are talking here about a controversial selection, because I don't know the sexual orientation of the artist that I decided to show in the Saint Sebastian room, and I don't care. What I was interested in was the subject of sort of beautiful male body and suffering, and of course we know from art history and from queer art history that the subject of Saint Sebastian is the most banal subject to some extent, that historical artists used to explore the sensuality of the male body. And that is why I decided to put it in the exhibition, and I didn't care about the sexual orientation of the artist. That created the painting. These are some contemporary pieces, like Krzysztof Jung, this gay pioneering artist by a Lithuanian artist. And this is Wojciech Fangor, a very famous Polish artist, and his Saint Sebastian from 1955, which is also in the collection of the kind of social realist Saint Sebastian to some extent, in the collection of the National Museum. And this is a film scene from Karol Radziszewski. And now, lesbian imagination. And the section lesbian imagination is the most difficult one. Of course, we can make many jokes why it would be difficult for me to do lesbian imagination exhibition, and people criticized me heavily for this section. First of all, I wanted to do a historical exhibition with artworks from the entire history of art plus contemporary art. And of course, we know that up to the 19th century, there were very few female artists. So this is the first problem. And we don't know the sexual identity quite often of 17 or 18 of those very few 17th and 18th century artists. So I decided to use iconographic tropes and iconographic key for my selection. So for example, a lot of images of Diana and nymphs were in the exhibition. From the posters division of the National Museum, I collected and I put on display all the posters with Greta Garbo, and especially Greta Garbo playing the Queen Christina, the 17th century Swedish queen who was queer, and we know about it from her letters. And then some contemporary art pieces by contemporary women painters that we know that are lesbians, or feminist women artists, like, for example, Izabela Gustowska from Poland, who quite often deals with female same-sex relationships, or female solidarity, female homosociality in her art. And a couple of words about the American part. This is a series by Catherine O'Keefe, so a very famous major A-list contemporary American artist from California, from Los Angeles, and her series of paintings showing, I don't have any close-ups unfortunately, showing same-sex, female same-sex families across America. And there is a story behind this series. First of all, why American art in the collection? And not in the collection, but in the exhibition. It was not in the collection, it was on loan for the exhibition. So I didn't want to make an exhibition which is national. Even though it was in the National Museum, my ideas were transnational. I wanted to have a cosmopolitan exhibition. And this is one of the main problems, my problems, even though I love the exhibition at Tate queer British art. My problem was that it was only British art there. And I think that we do, and even without any colonial elements, we know that this horrible Victorian colonial law, anti-sodomy law, has been imposed on internationally, globally, on many countries, and I think that this is an obligation by the British curatorial and museum world to show us many queer artists from those places where there is still this anti-sodomy law as possible. This is like moral and ethical obligation of British curators to show queer art from places where the British sodomy law is still oppressing people. And unfortunately, the queer British art exhibition didn't do it. It was focused only on kind of national British art from Britain. So in my exhibition, and the same, the exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, it was the queer portrait in the history of American art. I wanted to do an exhibition which is cosmopolitan, because both queerness and cosmopolitanism and transnational values, they work against nationalism. Queerness, it is something that works against nationalism, and cosmopolitanism, it is something that works against nationalism. So queer exhibitions should be international exhibitions, from my point of view. And of course, contemporary American art, especially since the 80s, is absolutely essential for queer art globally, because of the major masters of this art and mistresses of this art that inspired many artists globally. And Kathleen O'P is a very essential and a very important artist, like Robert Mapplethorpe, for example, is. And I think that that's important to include them in exhibitions in other places, in places like Poland as well, especially that contemporary American art had a great influence on Polish art. And to have a piece like this, a series by Kathleen O'P, is difficult, because this is a major artist. You have to deal with the gallery that represents the artist, and then you have to deal with transportation and the insurance, which is very expensive. So I'm talking now a little bit about curatorial details. So the exhibition didn't get any sponsorship in Poland, in the National Museum, because all the usual sponsors that sponsor big exhibitions in the national museums, for example, petrol companies and companies like this, they withdrew from the show. They didn't want to sponsor homosexual exhibition at the National Museum. So that is why the museum had to be supported totally by public money, which means the money that the museum gets per year in its national budget. So it was difficult financially, but not impossible. Plus, I also applied for some financial support to many embassies and cultural institutes of all these countries, Romania, the Czech Republic, for example, Croatia, Lithuania, to pay for the artist, for the travel of the artist, for the hotel, or for the transportation of artworks. So it was a lot of organization, but this is the work of curators nowadays, unfortunately, in Europe, getting money for the exhibitions. So we got the support of local embassies and national institutes, but mainly it was the state, the federal Polish money that the museum received that covered art homoerotica and completely financially ruined the museum as well, because it was a big show, it was an expensive exhibition, so we have to direct money from many other exhibitions for this exhibition, because it didn't get any corporate support at all. So it was so expensive to pay the insurance and the transportation from Los Angeles, and the gallery was difficult as well, that I decided to ask for help the American embassy in Poland. And this was a very special time historically in 2010, because it was the beginning of Obama administration. It was when Hillary Clinton became the Secretary of State, and suddenly it became possible for the American embassy to support queer rights in Central and Eastern Europe, something that they couldn't do openly before in this region. And that is why the American embassy, they paid for everything. They organized the transportation. It was brought to Warsaw in like 2 days on a special jet from Los Angeles. They dealt with the gallery. So it was totally supported by the American embassy at the time, which again, historically speaking, wouldn't be today. I'm not saying that the American embassy in Poland is homophobic, because it's not, but it wouldn't be so helpful to organize a major queer exhibition in the National Museum, especially that this exhibition wouldn't be possible anyway. But at this very particular historical and political intersection, all these forces allowed us to organize the show and to bring Catherine O'Keefe to Poland and her series of same-sex lesbian families across America. And then again some historical element. According to the curators, I don't believe in it. I think that this is some kind of propaganda of the National Museum in Warsaw, but according to the curators that work in the antiquity collection of the museum, the oldest representation of the poetess Sappho, which you see right now at this skullpiece, is in the collection of the National Museum. So this is the oldest representation of the poetess Sappho ever, according to the curators of antiquity. As I mentioned, I don't believe in it, but I'm buying it for the purpose of the exhibition and for the propaganda of the exhibition, and I took this skullpiece, this vase, from a very boring display